Hello and welcome to another episode of the Global Reset with me, Prashant Nair. You're watching CNBC TV 18 Prime. India's chip ambitions are no longer theoretical. From Dholera to Sanand, fab and OSAT facilities are finally breaking ground with global partnerships, capital commitment, and a clear policy tailwind. The centerpiece of this push is the India Semiconductor Mission, a government-led effort not just to import tech, but to build self-reliance in semiconductor manufacturing, packaging and talent as well. Last week, the fourth India Semicon conference showcased how this vision is evolving and accelerating. With the first fab line set to go live soon, the real question is, can India build an ecosystem, not just plants? Joining me today in short order will be GS Madhusudan, CEO of InCore Semiconductors, a homegrown player developing RISC-V-based processors and driving India's design to deployment ambitions. Professor Sushobhan Avasthi is someone who you've seen on this program earlier, is of course with the Indian Institute of Science, one of the key academic voices shaping India's semiconductor talent pipeline and training infrastructure. But first, let me just quickly break this down in terms of what came out of the India Semicon event. Well, let's start with the broader ambition. India is pitching semiconductors as the new digital diamonds, and that's a quote. Just as oil once powered economies, chips now power everything. With $9 billion already committed and $100 billion plus projected market value, the India Semiconductor Mission is not just a one-off scheme. It's a strategic industrial policy in motion. This year's India Semicon Conference wasn't just talk. It brought forward clear signals from the top. The Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, underlined chips as digital assets. ISM 2.0 was confirmed, and I think this is a big one for the industry. There were some doubts whether there will be more coming after ISM 1.0. This will, of course, push faster execution. And more importantly, three global giants, Micron, Infineon, and Tata Electronics, showcase actual products and packaging capabilities. Here's where India's chip build-out gets real. Fabs and OSAT facilities are finally moving from paperwork to production. Gujarat is emerging as a chip hub, especially Sanand and Dholera, with Tata's 91,000 crore rupee fab being the crown jewel. Micron, Keynes, which is a listed company, CG Power, which is also listed, all have live projects underway. One of the stars of the event was Keynes Technology, once seen as a EMS player, which is contract manufacturer for electronic items. Keynes is fast evolving into a serious OSAT contender. Their partnerships span Infineon to A&O, and with a 6 million chip per day facility going live by December, that's a projection, Keynes is proof that mid-sized Indian firms can scale globally if policy demand and execution align together. Now, the government acknowledges that capital subsidies alone won't deliver a semiconductor ecosystem. The next frontier is deeper, training PhDs, developing operators, creating access to advanced tools, and encouraging design-led R&D. ISM 2.0 is expected to carry this broader vision forward. As I said, let me now welcome in our guests, GS Madhusudan, CEO of InCore Semiconductors. Professor Avasthi is with the Indian Institute of Science and leading the efforts on the semiconductor side at IISc Bangalore. Gentlemen, great to have both of you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Prashant, this side. Professor Avasthi, if we can start with you, sir. Sharp 2-3 takeaways for you from the event which concluded recently.
So number one, I think the facilities that are coming up, I think the fact that they are breaking ground and progress is happening and we can expect the fab to come in the next 2 years, and the multiple packaging facilities to come online later this year and early next year, I think that's very encouraging. That gives a lot of hope because frankly speaking, a lot of the ecosystem that we sort of talk about was in this wait and watch mode, watching these facilities come up so that there is a pull for their products. The second thing that I noticed was there was a particular emphasis. I was at the event. There was particular emphasis from Japanese companies, which was interesting because I think PM Modi had a visit to Japan recently, and many of them were looking for partnerships. Many of them were looking for investment opportunities. And the third thing that really stuck out for me, at least, was the Indian ecosystem seems to have finally woken up. When I mean the ecosystem, I don't mean just faculty and training. But the supply base, people who supply chemicals, the people who supply materials, many of them were very curious about what semiconductor space had to offer and how can they upgrade themselves so they can partner in that ecosystem.
Professor Avasthi, were you there at the event?
I was there for the first 2 days.
Okay. We last time we spoke about talent and the back end and uh, the manpower, not just operators. Was that addressed at the event? I mean, was there an acknowledgement towards that?
I think there's a general acknowledgement of that area. I mean, I have been part of every Semicon, and I think this has been talked about enough. But the challenge is that unless those facilities come up, there is really no demand yet. I mean, only when the facilities come up will the people start hiring. So talent has been talked about. Mostly what people are doing is important talent. That is, I think, to a first order. True. I hope that will change, and we will actually start creating talent in-house.
Mr. Madhusudan, I trust you sort of followed the event as well. To your mind, what really stood out to you, if I can start there?
Just one single point, the fact that we're seeing traction on the ground. Semiconductor is a long game. It's a multi-decadal game. And sometimes people tend to be in a hurry saying that we want 7 nanometer fabs, 5 nanometer fabs, right? We need to first crawl before we can walk. And the standard example I gave is, I mean, you don't attempt Mount Everest on the first day, you build a base camp, right? So we need to build an ecosystem with older nodes. There needs to be a degree of pragmatism. There needs to be an acknowledgement that we have a long road ahead. I think so. It's good to see common sense taking front and center and the right foundation being laid. That is very heartening, which means that we are going about it the right way.
You know, what is the focus, Mrs. Madhusudan, too much on fabs, plants and not enough on IP design, foundational tech? How do you see that? Yes.
I completely agree, but you should realize that IP design tech tends to be hidden. You also need, the government also needs the country going, right? There needs to be a bit of buy-in from across. See, this can't be an elitist activity. This is something that the country has to buy in. And for that, you need a few fabs and a lot more OSATs to start happening. Otherwise, you will not get the momentum from across the industry. But now that we have done it, we have a few fabs, a few more OSATs. There has to be a greater thrust on local products because ultimately, see, we are doing a lot of the older node fabs, correct? From 300 nanometers to 28 nanometers. There is a bit of a glut in the world. The Chinese are ramping up on older nodes a lot. It's going to be a while before we get to the advanced nodes. So we can't rely completely on exports. And as recent events have shown, a completely export-reliant industry can be problematic. But we have enough local demand to fill any fabs that we build, provided we have local chips. So we need to start seeing local chips, specifically in the mobile phone market, the LCD TV market, appliances, FMCG, and automotive.
Both of you you're kind of sort of making driving towards the same point that seeing some of this stuff up and running is important, right? And that gets in more people interested that this is actually possible, this is happening, and that buy-in then comes, Mr. Madhusudan. I guess that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, because see, whenever people think semiconductors, it's not just the esoteric part of the semiconductor, right? Clean rooms, that means people who can provide facilities to clean up the air in a semiconductor plant. That's the same thing that goes into a chemical plant or a hospital, right? So a lot of them are industries with multiple use. So a semiconductor ecosystem actually builds up a very high quality industrial base. So the multiplier effects of a semiconductor ecosystem are enormous, and you will feel its effect across at least 5 to 10 different industries. That is why the ecosystem is important. But to feed the fabs that you're going to create and the OSATs you're going to create, we now need to focus on local chips.
Just one point on the DLI, which is the design-linked incentive, and of course it's a great positive step. But in terms of scale, visibility, etc., Mr. Madhusudan, does it pale in comparison to the PLI?
It does. I mean, we were kind of instrumental in advising the government of the DLI program, not so much on the PLI. please look at it from the government's perspective, right? So when we were talking to Mr. Krishnan, the MeitY secretary, he said, look, I want to make sure DLI's first purpose is clear, which is that we want to make sure no startup comes back with an excuse saying that we couldn't do something because we didn't have money, right? He said, look, MeitY cannot predict which chip is going to succeed in the market, which chip is not going to succeed in the market. Nobody can, right? So in the design ecosystem, I think the government has done pretty much everything it can. I mean, it's giving you free tools. It used to give 15 crores in the earlier DLI, the new one is 50 crores. Uh, it's giving, I think, subsidized shuttles. There is some IP program. Pretty much anything a government can do has been done. But how to conceive of a product that will get traction in the market to sell it successfully, G2M strategies, all of those are private sector specialties, right? So my standard soundbite in this is the IITs and the other engineering institutes have done the job. Now it's time for the kids from the IIM to do the job of conceptualizing good chips that will find traction both in India and abroad. And again, my standard soundbite is if you want to do chips, focus on the lower end. I call it the 2020 vision. It is focus on 20% of the world market for chips costing below $20 because lower margin chips are going out of fashion in the West. They would love to move to higher end chips. And the bottom of the market is available to both to us and the Chinese. Only these two countries can match the kind of volumes that is needed. So there's a huge growth possibility even in terms of exports that's possible. But for that, a product ecosystem needs to come into play, which will require massive investment by venture capitalists, by other private equity players. It will also require strong marketing personnel because till now, Indian design houses have created products based on somebody else's imagination. But to conceive of a product to take it to market requires a lot of courage. That is what is lacking. We don't have enough good marketing personnel who can essentially create demand or create new products. It can be done. I'm not saying it's a problem, but it'll take you over the next like 3 to 5 years before we find our footing where we can compete with the global players in terms of product conceptualization and product launches.
Professor Avasthi, there's a shout out to you and others. The academic institutions have done their job, and now it's on to the management guys to power this ahead. You know, you brought up some of the Japanese interest in scouting for partnerships, etc. Just run us through the technology stack in this regard. I mean, there's of course technology transfers, etc., which many will be looking for, but at the same time, there is also building indigenous capability. What's the right balance here?
If I just understand your question, you're asking what are the various technologies that we need to develop in order to be indigenous or in order to be self-sufficient going forward? Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
So I just take off from what Madhu said. Just like there is a technology stack that is focused on design. Am I still there?
You're there. Go on, sir. Go on.
Just like there is a manufacturing, just like there's a design ecosystem and a design IP, there's also manufacturing IP. When you say I'm making a 28 nanometer chip, the 28 nanometer process is sort of unique to each fab. TSMC has slightly different, Intel has slightly different. Right now, what India is doing is importing 28 nanometers. But going beyond 28 nanometers, India probably has to develop their own 10 nanometer process, their own 7 nanometer process. So there's a lot of process IP that needs to be developed. The second thing needs to happen is semiconductor manufacturing requires some very specialized materials and chemicals. Some extremely pure water, some extremely pure sulfuric acid. We produce enough of sulfuric acid, but none of the purity that is needed to work in a fab. So the local chemical ecosystem needs to rise up to the occasion and start producing materials that can actually go into a fab. And then there's a whole service part of it that, which was alluded to, that we need people who can maintain clean rooms, people who can maintain the equipment, people who can maintain the testing ecosystem that is sort of needed to sustain a fab. And then, of course, we need to make multiple fabs. I mean, one fab is not nearly enough. Out of the 10 semiconductor facilities that are coming up under India Semiconductor Mission, 9 are packaging, which is the easier thing to do, which is the correct thing to do. But there's only one fab, and we need to probably increase that. And there will be a different fab for many different types of technology. We are focusing on CMOS and silicon. Maybe we need display fabs. We need compound semiconductor fabs. We need gallium nitride fabs. So all that action needs to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Allow me to, gentlemen, stay with us. We'll take a quick commercial break, come back, and just sort of continue this conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the evolution of the semiconductor industry here in India. Of course, ecosystem. It'll take time, but I think it's a conversation that we will continue to have here on CNBC TV 18 Prime. This one, of course, on the back of the Semicon event, which, of course, concluded a few days ago. I'm in conversation with Mr. Madhusudan of InCore and Professor Avasthi of Indian Institute of Science. Mr. Madhusudan, if I can sort of ask you to respond to some of the comments which Mr. Professor Avasthi made, which is with regards to the technologies that we need here indigenously, that we need to go after. Your thoughts on this matter, sir?
Yeah. See, in general, India has been very lax in the material science world. And even if you look at college admissions and stuff, there is a inherent caste system, right? The kids with the highest marks go to computer science and electronics, and people with the lowest one get assigned metallurgy, material science, and all of that, which is absurd. If at all anything, should be the other way around. Semiconductor is all about material science and less about computing. So we have underinvested significantly, both in funding in colleges, in terms of faculty, and in terms of creation of high performance materials. We are feeling this effect both in terms, if you look at like our gas turbine development, right? We're having problem in single crystalline blades and so on. So it's time I think there has to be a PLI specifically for advanced materials, not just for this industry, but for other industries also. Because without advanced materials, you simply cannot advance as a civilization. It's not possible. Human civilization actually revolves around material science. Everything else is secondary, whether it be new drug materials, purification of drugs. There's a common thread in all of this, right? And the reason we are having a problem evolving a semiconductor industry is because of our underinvestment in materials and high precision engineering.
So PLI on the materials front.
On the material side and precision engineering, right? So one of the industries we need to grow is actually all the semiconductor equipment. Otherwise, you'll have an absurd problem. You can put up 20 fabs, and if all the fab equipment has to be imported and somebody doesn't embargo, you're dead in the water. Somebody doesn't give you a spare part, you're gone, right? So we need to do exactly what we did in the textile industry. I don't know whether you remember, back in the 70s, everything used to come from Switzerland and Germany. Then the Japanese kind of took over, then the Taiwanese. And I think starting the 90s, the Indian companies started manufacturing high precision textile machinery locally. The same thing is happening with CNC machining. With semiconductors, we need to start right at the beginning. At least for the older node fabs, we should ensure that in a 5-year, maybe in a 10-year period, more than 50% of the equipment, I think, should come from local vendors, including lithography.
Right.
We can do joint ventures and all that. And the older node technology should be reasonably available. This is precisely what the Chinese are doing, right? They're trying to create a homegrown product ecosystem for semiconductor equipment. It'll come to bite you 15 years down the line. Whenever geopolitics changes, a country of 1.4 billion people can't be held to ransom by anybody else. It's absurd. We're a civilizational entity. We need to control our destiny.
I know that's well put. But on the equipment side, even with even countries which make chips, right? I mean, I think there are only this is also a very concentrated market, right, for equipment globally.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, far lesser number of equipment makers as compared to chip makers around the world, in that sense. In India,
Yes.
are there any efforts on?
Yeah, there is. So the Tamil Nadu government has got a equipment manufacturing park in Sulur, 200 acres. I think the first vendor has already shipped one equipment exported. So that is happening. We need to ramp it up. So whenever delegations go abroad, the first thing I tell them is talk to the equipment vendors and see, even if it's something trivial, right? It doesn't have to be high-end lithography and so on. Uh, I mean, as the professor pointed out, uh, purified chemicals, high purification
Right.
systems, clean air, a whole bunch of things that need to happen in the equipment thing. One problem we have in lithography is we don't have an optical industry at all. We don't have a camera industry. So if you look at optical steppers, you will see Nikon, Zeiss, all the guys who do SLR cameras are the guys who are doing thing. So if you don't have a camera industry, you don't have a lithography industry, at least steppers, right? So again, everywhere where we're underinvested, it's coming to bite us.
Yeah. In that park that you spoke about, that is equipment for semiconductor in Tamil Nadu. That's for...
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So there's a specific effort by the Tamil Nadu government. Look, the fabs could not come here. I advised the Tamil Nadu government. They said, okay, the next best thing, if you're not getting the fabs here, is let's at least get the equipment vendors over here, which is a smart strategy. Because everybody puts up a fab, people need to supply equipment. And look, semiconductors, older nodes are getting to be a cutthroat business. So the equipment prices need to drop. A 65 nanometer plant costs you something, a minimum of 3 billion to set up. And a lot of that goes to fab equipment, right? So if you need to drop prices, the equipment prices also need to drop.
Yeah, yeah. We seem to be making and building out fabs to make some of the older semiconductor chips, right? Is that a risk at all? I wanted to ask both of you. I mean, the rate at which technology is evolving, we're doing what we can, but do you think in the global marketplace? But as I think Mr. Madhusudan, you said there's enough domestic demand to cater to use all of that. But is there a risk of falling behind or no? I mean, it's a stepping stone to do higher end stuff later.
It is a stepping stone unless you got a widespread industry where people know how to handle high purity chemicals, high precision manufacturing. You can't. You need to crawl first. I don't know why everybody's in a hurry to get to 7, 5. Look at the trouble Intel is having. Look, Intel is not able to get to 1.8 nanometers quickly, right? They're having problems. Samsung, the only company that has cracked it successfully is TSMC. It's not an easy task. UMC, a global foundry, all of them gave up at 10 nanometers. They refused to do the 7 nanometers. Currently, there's only one fab in the world that is successfully shipping 2 nanometers, and that is TSMC. You got all the time in the world, and most of the world supplies between 300 nanometers to 28 nanometers.
Got it. Professor Avasthi, please go on. You've been listening.
In fact, I think there's a misnomer. I mean, 2 nanometers has become quite fashionable to talk about, but you see, making smaller devices, and that's what 2 nanometer represents, the smallest device we can make, is only really useful for digital systems. Analog electronics actually does not even benefit too much from scaling. I mean, there's a whole bunch of EV chips that need to be made for the energy transition. There's a whole bunch of communication chips need to be made for 4G and 5G, and none of that really requires that aggressive a scaling. There is enough market, both export and internal, at these older nodes. Challenge is to get the fabs running, and as I think has been discussed, get the ecosystem going.
Anything on the equipment side you want to add, Professor Avasthi?
Equipment is an interesting bit. We sort of have to first understand why is it that equipment is so heavily concentrated. I mean, for everything, there are only 2-3 vendors. For lithography, there is only one. And the reason that is when you're making an investment of $3 billion at the older node and $40 billion at the advanced node, the numbers are so big that there is a general tendency to be risk averse and only choose the best. There's a winner take all mentality from the fab, and I don't blame them for it. What is doable, however, in the short term is even if we cannot create big players that can actually supply equipment, we can at least start doing a lot of subsystem sourcing. Companies like Lam Research, Applied Materials are actually on record that from India, they want to source up to $1 billion of subsystems and subcomponents. If we can just start addressing that market, and we can do that within the next year or two, that itself will be a huge progress, because that will set us up to then look for these bigger challenges of actually developing litho systems, of actually developing full-on deposition systems. I see green shoots in it, but we don't have to boil the ocean. We can actually start small.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Madhusudan, just last question before we wrap up, sir. What advice would you've built InCore in a space that I guess most investors, and I generally speak with public market investors, and semiconductors is nowhere in their on their radar? They're all doing private market investments now, but I've not heard too many semiconductor-related investments yet. What advice would you give young founders chasing sort of, deep tech, semiconductor kind of ambitions?
Know your market well. A lot of founders I'm seeing, and they're floundering a bit also, unfortunately, is that they think it's a nice, cool piece of technology, they do it, right? You may not need a go-to-market strategy. That's probably too much to ask of a young founder, but you need to have an awareness of the market, right? Let me give you an example. IP camera chips, which are all in vogue, right? A typical IP camera chip in the world market sells for between $1.8 to $2.5. And if you include amortized costs and all that, the profitability is very low. We all put together, if you can make some 10, 20 cents, that's not much. So when you're doing commodity chips, unless you've got high volumes, you're not going to make it. So startups preferably should look at something with a little extra to differentiate yourself in the market. I see too many startups chasing commodity chips. If you already have a relationship with the distributor to take the commodity chips, that is okay. But I wish young entrepreneurs would spend a little more time in understanding the market, talking to distributors, talking to EMS companies to understand where the demand is. Then they can conceive of products which have got a greater chance of succeeding in the market. So market awareness is what companies should focus on before they take a plunge into doing a startup.
It's a fascinating subject, and I learn something new every time I speak to Professor Avasthi and now to you, Mr. Madhusudan, as well. And I hope this can be, a series of conversations which I think must continue to have as we go forward, bringing to light what's happening in the system, what needs to be done, and of course tracking what the government is trying to do as well. Thank you both for joining us, Professor Avasthi and Mr. Madhusudan, on this program. Thanks indeed.